The sentence was read aloud in a voice so neutral it bordered on cruel efficiency, the kind perfected by people who never expected their words to matter to anyone in the room. Eran Vale stood with his hands folded behind his back, trying to look like a man who hadn't just been legally dismantled by a paragraph of interstellar statute written 3 centuries before his birth. He failed at that, but no one seemed invested enough to notice. As corrective measure, the magistrate continued, the defendant shall be bound under Civil Union Provision 49 to an off-world civilian deemed non-strategic, non-influential, and economically negligible. Eran blinked. He had expected exile, maybe a penal colony with carnivorous weather. Marriage had not made the list. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Someone behind him muttered, harsh, with the quiet admiration usually reserved for creative punishments. Eran opened his mouth to protest, then remembered that protesting was what had gotten him here in the first place. Instead, he settled for, do I at least get to meet her before agreeing to ruin both our lives? The magistrate tilted her head. Agreement is not required. That was when Saelith stepped forward. She did so carefully, as if approaching a skittish animal rather than a courtroom full of armed officials. At first glance she looked almost human, enough to trigger that uncomfortable instinct humans had around near mirrors, except for the long ears that swept back from her head in smooth arcs, twitching once as if reacting to a sound no one else could hear. She wore the standard off-world civilian wrap, regulation gray, regulation forgettable. I apologize, she said softly before anyone had spoken to her. I believe this is my fault. Eran stared. Is this some kind of test? She looked at him, genuinely puzzled. I don't think so. I failed most of those. A few people laughed, surprised into it. The magistrate cleared her throat sharply, restoring the atmosphere to its usual state of controlled misery. The legal binders hummed as biometric seals activated, wrapping the decision into permanence. Eran felt his wristband tighten, sinking to a stranger's signature. This union is effective immediately, the magistrate said. Any attempt to dissolve it will result in escalated penalties. Saleith leaned slightly toward Eran. On the positive side, she whispered, at least we didn't get the version with shared neural implants. I hear those itch. He snorted before he could stop himself, earning a glare from the bench. When he looked back at her, she was smiling faintly, the expression careful and fleeting, like someone trying on an unfamiliar emotion to see if it fit. They were escorted out together, not quite prisoners, not quite free. As the doors slid shut behind them, Eran exhaled slowly. So, he said, because silence felt dangerous, do you want to tell me why the government thinks marrying you is a punishment? Saleith considered this seriously. I have been described, she said, as exceptionally unimportant. She paused, then added, statistically speaking. Eran laughed again, helplessly this time, and wondered what kind of galaxy required laughter to survive its laws. The transport assigned to them was small, old, and deeply offended by the concept of comfort. It rattled its way out of the judicial ring with a sound like a mechanical sigh, as if it too disagreed with the ruling but lacked the authority to appeal. Eran sat strapped into a seat that kept trying to read his pulse, while Saelith sat opposite him, hands folded, studying the emergency instructions with intense concentration. I think, she said after a long moment, that if this vehicle begins venting atmosphere, we are meant to scream first and read later. That's standard human procedure, Eran replied. Sometimes we skip the reading entirely. She nodded, filing this away like valuable cultural data. Efficient. Their destination flickered onto the central display, a trade station so far from anything important that even the navigation system sounded apologetic announcing it. Eran leaned his head back. So that's it, exile by marriage. Yes, Saelith said. Congratulations, he laughed weakly. You're disturbingly calm about this. I was informed I would be reassigned eventually, she said. I assumed it would involve a recycling plant or an asteroid census. This is Novel. The ship lurched violently. Saelith's hand shot out and gripped the armrest before the movement fully registered. Eran then noticed that she immediately loosened her grip as if embarrassed by the reflex. "You do that a lot," he said. "Move before things happen." She tilted her head. "Do I?" "Yeah. Like you're arguing with time and usually winning." She smiled thinly. "I have good instincts." The station greeted them with bureaucratic enthusiasm and physical indifference. Their assigned habitation unit unlocked itself with a cheerful chime that felt wildly inappropriate. Eran stepped inside and stared at the single shared living space. "One bed," he said. "Yes," Saelith agreed. "That seems inefficient." "I was thinking more along the lines of illegal." She consulted her wristband. "According to subsection 12, physical proximity encourages compliance." "Of course it does." They unpacked in silence, which was broken only when Saelith attempted to activate the food synthesizer, and caused it to produce something that smoked gently while making a sound like it was judging them. "I followed the instructions," she said, defensive. "Those are warnings." "Oh, they ate anyway." Eran decided the texture was best described as brave. Saelith chewed carefully, then said, "Is it always this spicy?" "That's not spice. That's radiation shielding residue." She brightened. "Then it is authentic." Later, as station lights dimmed to artificial night, Eran sat on the edge of the bed, unsure where to put his thoughts. Saelith stood near the doorway, clearly planning to sleep on the floor. "You don't have to do that," he said. "The law already hates us. We don't need to help it." She hesitated, then sat beside him, careful not to touch. For a moment neither spoke. "Eran," she said finally, "if this arrangement becomes intolerable, I will try to be very quiet about it." He looked at her, at the seriousness with which she offered this absurd mercy, and felt something in his chest loosen. "Deal," he said. "I'll try not to get us arrested again." She smiled, a little more genuinely this time, and somewhere deep in the station, an alarm chimed briefly, then stopped, as if reconsidering. Days passed with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a station that had long since given up trying to impress anyone. Eran and Saelith fell into routines that teetered between awkward domesticity and improbable cooperation. He handled the communication consoles, replying to endless trade requests with the dry efficiency of a man who had once dreamed of bureaucracy as a form of entertainment. She managed the supplies, moving through storage rooms and corridors with a precision that made Eran suspect she was cataloging every anomaly in the station's wiring as well. "You know," he said one evening as they assembled a crate of trade goods, "for someone the law describes as useless, you're disturbingly competent." Saelith paused, tilting her head. "Competence is subjective," she said. "Also, I find irony therapeutic." He laughed. "I'll keep that in mind next time the law tries to ruin me." Their humor became a small shield against the absurdity of their punishment. She asked him to explain human jokes, misinterpreting idioms in ways that had him stifling laughter, so the station's automatic monitoring system wouldn't think he was having a seizure. "You're literally going to fry the emergency protocols," he told her once. She considered this gravely. "Then it's a good day to practice restraint," she said, which made him laugh until the synth food dispenser sputtered in protest. Yet beneath the surface, Eran began noticing peculiarities in her behavior. When maintenance drones whirred unexpectedly close, she flinched and then moved in ways that were disturbingly precise, almost preemptive. When a crate tipped dangerously near the edge of a docking platform, she caught it with a single hand while stepping back exactly 1 meter. She never spoke of these abilities, never acknowledged them except with a fleeting glance that said, "Nothing unusual here." One afternoon, while Eran was struggling with an outdated atmospheric regulator, Saelith appeared at the hatchway. She wore a small grin, the kind humans used when they were about to reveal something mildly embarrassing. "You know," she said, "this device has a tendency to explode if you treat it like a suggestion rather than a manual." "Right. Because all technology likes to be treated like royalty, he said, ducking as the regulator hissed. She laughed lightly, stepping in and twisting a panel with a single movement that sent the regulator purring in contentment rather than threatening their lives. Eran watched her, a sudden sense of disbelief creeping in. "You didn't study engineering, did you?" "No," she said softly. "I observed and practiced. A lot." Her long ears twitched in a way that reminded him of cats watching invisible prey. That evening, they sat in the dim glow of the station's common area. Eran had managed to get the synth food dispenser to produce something edible this time, a creamy protein paste that actually resembled food. "You're hiding something," he said, careful to keep his voice light, almost joking. "I don't know what it is, but I can feel it." Saelith's eyes flicked to him, then down at her hands. "I am not what the law thinks I am," she said quietly. "It's better this way. People fear what they understand too late." He considered this, trying to match her calm with his own bewilderment. "You're terrifying," he said, though he smiled. "And you are stubborn," she replied, her voice almost teasing. "I suspect it will make our days more interesting." For the first time, Eran realized that being bound to her might not be punishment at all. Not yet, anyway. There was a quiet tension in the air, the kind that promised upheaval, but for now it was tempered with something else. Humor, mutual curiosity, and the strange comfort of knowing he was not entirely alone, even in the farthest reaches of the galaxy. The alarms hit without warning, a high-pitched wail that rattled the station like a giant fingernail on steel. Eran flung himself off his chair, nearly tripping over the power conduits running along the floor. What's happening?" he shouted, his voice pitched somewhere between panic and incredulity. Saelith was already moving, a blur of motion that made his limbs feel like they were wading through molasses. She didn't run so much as glide, her long ears angled backward, scanning the air as if listening to a symphony of danger only she could hear. "Pirates," she said calmly, almost conversationally, "and very unprofessional ones at that." Eran blinked. "Pirates here, really?" "Yes," she replied, adjusting the station's security panel with a single hand. The lights flickered as if startled by her presence. "Apparently, they missed the memo that we are inconvenient to attack." Before he could respond, a volley of energy blasts tore through the corridor behind them. The hum of the station's atmosphere shifted, the gravity stabilizers compensating in quick, jerky bursts. Eran froze, a crate teetering on the edge of a cargo platform ready to crush him like an overgrown meteorite. "You need to move," Saelith said, not looking at him. She simply waved her hand and the crate lifted gently as though obeying a silent command. "This is safer." Eran blinked. "You lifted a crate without touching it." She shrugged almost apologetically. "Some training sticks, even when one wants it to be forgotten." The corridor outside their unit became a blur of sparks and smoke as pirates advanced, clumsily firing energy pistols that left scorch marks on the walls. Saleith moved forward, hands precise and measured, striking at the pirates in ways that defied expectation. A kick here, a push there, a subtle shift in gravity that sent attackers sliding into walls, all executed with near-inaudible efficiency. One pirate attempted to surrender, only to find himself delicately disarmed and suspended midair by an invisible force, as though the station itself was correcting his mistakes. Eran ducked behind a supply crate, watching in awe and disbelief. "Okay," he muttered to himself, "she is not useless." Saelith returned after clearing the corridor, dusting off her hands as if she had merely walked from one room to another. "They were sloppy," she said lightly. "I expected a challenge. This was remedial." Eran couldn't stop staring. "That was insane. You're insane. I mean, you're terrifying." She cocked her head, letting her ears sweep back lazily. "I am effective. Terrifying is optional." He swallowed, trying to imagine how the galaxy had misjudged her so completely. "So all that quiet, polite behavior," he gestured vaguely, "all of it was a front." "Not a front," she said, the corners of her lips twitching into something almost like a grin. I simply chose peace over chaos. Most people mistake silence for weakness. Eran laughed, a short, breathless sound, half relief and half incredulity. You've basically been hiding a superweapon behind polite manners and awkward food habits. She nodded solemnly. I try not to scare dinner guests. They tend to spill the protein paste when frightened. For the first time, the tension of their forced cohabitation shifted. He realized that Saelith's strength was not only physical but strategic. She had seen danger before it arrived, anticipated it, and neutralized it with surgical precision. And somewhere beneath all that deadly efficiency, she still carried humor, teasing him as if to remind him that even in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, laughter could survive. Eran exhaled slowly, leaning against the wall. Well, that changes everything. Saleith glanced at him, her eyes softening just slightly. Yes, she said, but the law still thinks I'm useless. Let's see how long we can enjoy that mistake. The morning after the pirate raid, the station hummed with a quiet that felt almost unnatural. Eran sat cross-legged on the floor of their unit, examining a datapad with the kind of focus usually reserved for war councils or gambling odds. So let me get this straight, he said, voice dry. You used to be the galaxy's most lethal combat specialist, and no one told me. Saelith was perched on the edge of the bed, methodically folding a small bundle of clothes as if she had rehearsed this conversation. Her long ears twitched lazily. I was, she said, but only because it was necessary. Now it is not. Most people believe me useless, which is convenient. Eran leaned back against the wall, incredulous. Convenient. You just turned 3 armed raiders into origami. Useless doesn't even come close. We need a new law for words that fail to capture reality. She glanced at him, eyes faintly amused. Humor is subjective. I leave that to humans. I focus on precision. He shook his head, a grin creeping across his face despite the absurdity of it all. You're like a cat pretending to nap on a sunbeam while secretly rearranging the furniture to protect the house from imaginary monsters. Her lips twitched in the beginnings of a smile. Your metaphors are curious, accurate in intent if lacking elegance. Eran laughed. Well, at least someone appreciates my skill in half-baked analogies. The conversation paused as a cargo drone wheezed past, carrying a crate that looked far too heavy for its own good. Saelith watched it with calm detachment. When the crate began to tilt dangerously, she lifted her hand casually. The crate rose, hovered, and set itself down neatly without spilling a single item. You do that a lot, Eran said, pointing. And I'm starting to think it's not just training or instinct. You're something else entirely. I prefer to think of it as efficiency, she said, brushing imaginary dust off her hands. It is less dramatic than something else, and far less likely to alarm trade inspectors. Eran chuckled. Right. Efficiency. That's one way to describe a walking armory with a side of sarcasm. They spent the afternoon going over station repairs, which had mostly been ignored by the official maintenance drones. Saelith worked with a calm precision that bordered on art, calibrating the magnetic locks, rerouting energy conduits, and repairing a minor gravity fluctuation that had been bothering the docking platform for weeks. Eran tried to assist but ended up tangled in a cable, prompting her to raise an eyebrow. Perhaps you should supervise from a safe distance, she suggested lightly. Not helpful, he said, but noted. Later, while reviewing station security logs, Saelith leaned over the console and made a slight adjustment, revealing an encrypted channel that the pirates had used to coordinate. Interesting, she murmured. They thought this station was defenseless. Eran looked at her, eyes wide. You think that's funny? I think it is predictable, she replied, a shadow of amusement in her voice. I also think it is an excellent opportunity for them to learn humility. Eran groaned, shaking his head. You enjoy this too much. I enjoy survival, she corrected, and the occasional poetic justice. As evening fell and the station lights dimmed to mimic a long, dusty sunset, Eran realized that he was no longer embarrassed by the law's punishment. Saelith was remarkable, undeniably lethal, and infinitely more interesting than any bureaucratic manual could prepare him for. They shared a rare meal, edible this time, though with the faint aroma of ionized metal and a quiet laughter that filled the small unit. For the first time, Eran felt something he hadn't expected, a strange sense of partnership. The law had bound them together as punishment, but now, in the edges of a station on the fringe of known space, they were learning something else entirely. Something far more powerful than rules or threats. Something that involved strategy, trust, and humor, all wrapped up in the improbable, unspoken truth that they might just survive, and perhaps even enjoy, themselves along the way. The comms console blinked insistently, a staccato rhythm that Eran had come to associate with trouble. He frowned, adjusting the viewer so the holographic display flickered to life. On the other side was a formal face he didn't recognize, Colonial Authority Inspector, complete with ceremonial shoulder plating, and a stare that suggested he had never learned how to enjoy anything at all. Station 9X07. The inspector began, voice dry as recycled air. We have reason to believe there is an unregistered operative aboard. Identification, please. Eran glanced at Saelith, who was leaning casually against the nearest bulkhead, her long ears twitching with mild interest. Unregistered operative, he repeated. Are we talking about me or you? She shrugged, a subtle curve of the lips that could have been mistaken for innocence. Depends on who's asking. Eran shot her a look. You're supposed to be useless, remember. Officially, she said. Unofficially, I am inconvenient in very entertaining ways. The inspector's voice cut through the air again. We require compliance immediately. Failure to cooperate will be considered an act of defiance. Eran leaned toward Saleith. So act normal. She tilted her head. Normal is a flexible concept in your species. I suggest we act strategically amusing instead. Moments later, the docking bay doors opened with a dramatic hiss. Inspectors marched in, unaware that the station itself seemed subtly shifting. Gravity fields adjusted, bulkheads subtly rearranged, and emergency lights flickered in patterns that made the intruders hesitate. Saleith moved first, her steps deliberate, eyes scanning the intruders as if reading a map invisible to anyone else. You might want to explain the protocol for unarmed inspections, Eran whispered, crouching behind a storage crate. I will handle it, she replied lightly. Observe and learn. With a calm sweep of her hand, the nearest inspector's comm unit short-circuited, producing a harmless but obnoxious series of beeps and whistles. Another tripped over an unseen magnetic field, stumbling into a bulkhead with a noise that sounded far too cartoonish for the situation. Eran stifled a laugh. I think we're breaking the law in style, he murmured. By the time the inspectors realized they were being manipulated, Saelith had orchestrated the entire space. They were moving in circles, distracted by minor malfunctions, while Eran quietly rerouted their credentials through the station's logs. You make it look easy, he said, genuinely impressed. It is a game of anticipation, Saelith replied, adjusting a floating crate with her mind, sending it to block the exit. And humans rarely anticipate anything. One inspector finally blurted, "This is impossible. The station everything is." Saelith raised a single finger. "Calm," she said. "Patience is a virtue. Also, please do not interrupt me while I am working." Within minutes, the inspectors were convinced that the unregistered operative they sought had vanished into thin air. Frustrated, they filed reports, cursing softly, unaware that the station itself had concealed the evidence of their intrusion. Eran exhaled, sinking into a chair that squeaked like it had lived through a dozen raids. That was incredible. She offered him a faint smile. I think you mean terrifyingly effective, but yes, it was also fun. Slightly. Eran laughed. Fun, huh? Only you could describe that chaos as fun. Saelith tilted her head, eyes glinting. Perspective is everything. And besides, we make a good team. You navigate bureaucracy, I navigate other problems. He shook his head, smiling. "You're insane. And you," she said softly, "are still alive, which counts as impressive in its own way." The station hummed quietly around them, the threat gone but the bond between them quietly solidifying. Eran realized that punishment had become partnership, and in a galaxy built on fear and law, they had carved out their own rules. Humor, survival, and trust woven together in a way that no statute could undo. The day began with an unusual quiet, a kind of deliberate calm that felt as if the station itself were holding its breath. Eran Vale stood at the viewport, watching a streak of cargo ships trace lazy arcs against the stars. Saelith appeared behind him, long ears brushing lightly against the back of his chair, carrying a tray with 2 steaming cups of synth-brewed beverage that smelled vaguely of roasted grains and ionized metal. "You've been quiet," she said. "Reflecting on recent events." "I suppose," he replied, taking the cup. "It's strange. I keep thinking about how the law bound me here as punishment, but somehow this place, this partnership, it doesn't feel like punishment anymore." Saleith leaned against the viewport, arms crossed, tilting her head in that subtle, calculating way. "It was never punishment in the sense you imagined. It was merely inconvenient for the system. We have found our own convenience." Eran chuckled. "You make that sound almost poetic." "Poetry is simply observation arranged cleverly," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "And we humans and Humans Plus seem to need cleverness." Their laughter faded into comfortable silence, but it was the kind of silence that felt alive, full of unspoken trust. News had reached them from the Colonial Authority. The so-called useless Saleith was officially declared off-limits, classified as a civilian entity beyond military claim. The law had inadvertently protected her. Eran had been reassigned, not to punishment, but to a position far from influence, a compromise that allowed him to remain at the station. Their imposed union had been rendered untouchable. "Looks like the system finally realized its error," Eran said, raising his cup. "It is amusing," Saelith replied. "They still underestimate us. Some habits die slowly." For weeks afterward, they stabilized the station. Saelith trained local security in techniques that were disguised as efficiency drills, but were subtly deadly if ever needed. Eran managed logistics, communicating with supply networks, and learning to bend bureaucracy in ways he had only dreamed of as a minor administrator. Humor threaded through everything. They mocked gravity fluctuations, joked about zero-G cuisine disasters, and occasionally staged drills that were more theatrical than necessary. One evening, as a minor meteor storm passed outside, Eran found himself laughing uncontrollably when Saelith attempted to explain human idioms to a holographic assistant that misunderstood every